to order at 6:02. With me in Beaverbrook are Teresa Fuzet, myself as committee members. Remotely is Kate Canetta and Juanita Harris. Is that correct, Juanita?
Sorry, I was muted. I am here.
Okay. All right, so we got four. And that's so consider that the roll call, Kate. Also in attendance with me here is Mr. John Spang, Kara Casamaro, and Michael Weaver. The purpose of tonight's meeting, there was a lot of documentation that was sent to you, but essentially the purpose of tonight's meeting is to try to explain, solve a mystery that I've been trying to figure out between the initial budget of $150 million, then it went to 154, then it went back to 150. I'd like the clarity on the transactions that bring it back down to 150 because that's the starting point for our difference between what we're doing currently. Once we go through that and have that understanding, John has presented a spreadsheet. It's the long spreadsheet where essentially he has classified the $10 million of the ESSER money into account classifications. And for clarity purposes, our operating budget this year in round numbers would be the $160 million as we refer to as the lights on budget plus the $10 million of the ESSER money. That's made up of our operational budget this year, totaling some $170 million. The other $8 million refer to that as is your operational budget. The other $8 million is essentially new asks that we put on there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John. A lot of the materials that he sent is for information purposes. You can read it at your leisure. I'm not sure how much of that is relevant to answering the questions tonight. So, thank you, John. It's all yours.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. Ken is going to help me, Ken Wallace, with presenting some of the documents. And Ken, I'm going to throw you a little curveball to start with. We're going to open up with the second slide you talked about, the one that says 23-24 operate. Yep, that's it right there. So I think everybody has this in their package. So it's what you have there. We call them the major objects. These 6 or 7 categories of expense. That's what they're called. And in front of you, you can see 3 years there. You can see the 21-22 actual, the 22-23 budget, and the 23-24 budget, those 3 columns. And you also see this presentation of major objects each month when we do our monthly budget report. The first page you see is the condensed line items, and it's the same thing here. So the salaries and benefits and so on and so forth. So as you look out at the 23-24 column, the far right, the typical kind of things you see as you go down. One of the things that was a little different last year, and we're doing it again next year, is when you go down to program improvement, you can see the line in this year's budget shot way up. Went from $1.3 million the year before to $5.5 million. And what that was, we had, like we did this year, we isolated the budget drivers so that we could talk about them if we needed to zero in on them. They wouldn't be blended in with everything else. And the big drivers in the current year budget, in that 5.5 million, was the ESSER two that was expiring. If you recall, there were over 30 positions, but a number of high school teaching positions. ESSER two was ending. We said, here's a driver. We want to add that into the school budget. We need to keep those teachers in the classrooms, and that's where we put it. It has a slightly different name when you look at what we're doing next year, but those are the accounts that it's in, and dues and fees and stuff. But that undesignated line, you can see that's a minus figure. It's a minus figure. So when you add the column down, and including the minus figure, you can see it comes out to 150 million. The difference between all of the plus numbers and 150 million is 4.7. It was not at the time really based on anything more than the fact that our target was 150 million last January. And before we get into what happened to that, if you look at the middle column, and for those of you recalling the 22-23 budget, we did something similar in that we isolated some savings down on that line. And in the 22-23 year, there really were two things that we thought we would achieve, and we did. One was about $500,000 of positions that we didn't need to carry forward. At the time, we saw our enrollment at the elementary school level going down. We were coming back from Brookfield, and we didn't think we'd need as many elementary positions as we had, all the while keeping class size about the same. So that was 500,000 of that. And then we also felt, and we had a very different outlook of the labor market then. I think it was more of a traditional. We were coming back from COVID, but we definitely did not see the tightness that we're seeing now, or the competition for the fewer teachers who were applicants and candidates that we eventually saw. But we thought we would have what's some people have called breakage or salary savings, the difference between people who were retiring, and we knew we had a higher number than normal of retirees just because of COVID. A number of people were saying, I'm not going back, that's it. You heard all that. So we knew we'd be hiring replacements, and we thought, as we always did, we'd no problem bringing people in at the lower steps compared to the steps that people were leaving at, and we figured we'd get $900,000 just from that turnover. So, of course, what surprised us was the labor market that year, and I won't go into that, but those two things were savings that we built in the budget after the city council had lowered our ask, and we had to come up with an operating plan for the year. So you see, but in the year, the current year, it wasn't based on anything other than trying to target 150 as a goal. But we also knew there were a number of vacancies going on at the time. We actually put this budget together in November of 22. And at the time, we had 86 vacant positions. I think almost 40 of them were teachers, but most of them were paras. We, by then, were struggling with hiring them, and we figured there would be some savings when we closed our books 7 or 8 months later. But what happened, Ken, if you want to go to the next page, here I listed a few things that during those 6 months happened that took away the savings we thought we'd have in November. You know, we tried to fill the vacancies, and we were moderately successful as the pandemic eased. But we also had to cover the classes, whether they were core classes or electives. And you've heard us talk about teacher overloads. That's the teacher has contractually 6 periods to teach, and they're willing to teach a 7th. We would pay for that extra work. And we had quite a bit of it. I think it probably was over $600,000 when all was said and done, but we had to cover that work. We also, what's called period coverage, if you have a vacancy or a absence, you might just go up to a teacher who has a lunch period or a free period or something like that and say, can you cover this class just for one day, just at this time? And our teachers are always willing to help. But you have to pay a little for that. And so that was going on during that period. And we also began to be successful hiring. Remember, in our minds, these were positions, and they still are, that would last long past June. So that's why I call them their permanent hires. We continue to do that. So that took up some of the savings we had budgeted, but it was really the self-insurance claims that hurt us. They jumped up beginning in February, and according to Gallagher, who's our consultant and advises us, they said there's really a couple things going on. One is they said you have a much higher number of high-cost claimants than you normally had, you ever had before. They should, we don't, of course, we don't want to know who they are, but they would describe some of the situations they were in and the cost of their care and how the number of people in those situations was much more than we typically have. So that surprised us. And they also said that what was happening, not just here, but what Cigna says across their book of business, that's what they describe it, was that people were beginning to go back to the doctors and hospitals that they hadn't been able to go to or wanted to go to while COVID was peaking, including some of the elective surgeries that they put off, but also some of the care that they would have gotten, some of the, I wouldn't quite call it preventive care, but early care that you would get. They were now returning to their doctors a little further along than was expected. And so here's where being self-insured, you take that risk that things are going to be normal or typical, and when they're not, this is what happens. So our claims went way up compared to what we thought they'd be. As it turned out, they ended the year pretty close to budget. But we had even with so many vacancies, it really shouldn't have in a normal year. And I think that it took us a while to catch up with that. And I think that's one of the reasons we weren't reporting on this happening with a little more clarity. We couldn't quite figure it out. So why are we so good versus budget, but we're hearing all these things going on? And so the savings that we thought we'd get from the 86 vacancies included health insurance claims, but that's not what happened, and that really hurt us. The other things I put on there, the right to read legislation, that really didn't impact the budget, but what we did when that legislation required school districts to put in a new elementary reading curriculum, we used our ESSER II grant that was about to expire. We had some money there. And the reason I mention it was, had we not used the grant, I think there would have been money there that we could have used. We could have moved other expenses in there to create the savings that we were budgeted. But we needed to go forward with the reading program. That was a couple $1 million. So it was a factor last spring. And then finally, we, like average homeowners too, we were seeing much higher energy costs. We used some heating oil to heat some of our buildings. We have natural gas too. That was up. Fuel, even our electric bills had gone up like anyone else. So several of those were above budget. So all those things happening cut into the savings we thought we'd get. But Ken, you want to go to the next page? Oh, sure. Yeah, you're the chairman.
Yeah. Just let me follow the thinking on this, because to me, it's important I understand the sequence of events. So you're making a budget of $150 million, and when you're presenting and coming up with the numbers, you have anticipated categories or line numbers that you feel are going to be not utilized, or you're going to have savings on. And therefore, you adjust down your, however your premise is, your starting point, to a net number. Ultimately, you get down to the 150. A short time later, you realize that the anticipated savings you had was not going to be recognized or materialized, and therefore there were costs that were incurring that were offset against those savings that were now in the red, so to say. You didn't have any offset savings for. And that necessitated you to go back and say that we needed 154 and change 154.7 instead of the 150. Is that basically the way it worked?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the year we're in now. So that's still what we're faced with.
Okay.
A good example, I think, is the school bus contract. So after we had this plan in place, we called in the bus company and we said to them, is there a chance we can negotiate prepaying our bus contract? We would pay you in June instead of in September and October. Because they're on a calendar year. What we would have done was use the savings, pay the bus company, and then lower the line in the budget for transportation this year because we had already paid it. They said they would be willing to accept, now remember, the bus contract is close to $14 million. And they said they would accept a prepayment of $2 million. And in exchange, they would lower our liability by $20,000. So almost like a prepayment discount, so to speak, of 1%. We weren't just going to pay them early unless we got something for it. And we would have gotten $20,000 savings by doing that. But as it turned out, when we got to June, we didn't have the $2 million to give them, so the deal never happened. We had some other ideas. We were going to do something with some of the special education settlements that were signed and sealed. We would have had to pay those in September. Accounting wise, we could, because they were obligations already signed from earlier years, we could have paid those in June, would have been okay with the auditors, and then lowered the budget in the fall, for the fall, but we were never able to do that either. So we had some strategies, but we couldn't enact them.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And notwithstanding the strategies, we're now left with a budget at a point in time that's $4.7 million higher.
Correct.
And you and I had previous conversations where I wanted some sort of an accounting of how you came away with, I'm trying to come up with a word. Yeah, it came away with a balance of $3 million, because I remember at the time there was a lot of hullabaloo in the papers, and that's when the 1.6 or the 1.7 here was indicated as to the cut.
Right.
That left me with two questions. One was the balance of $3 million. What happened to that? And then secondly, the $919,000 that we have on the other schedule, I don't think it's on the board, I can't see, but it's school operating budget where it shows the 150, 154, the 1.6. The 919,000 where it says allocating staffing to grants. Okay, that 919,000, if I'm correct, was then taken out of the operation budget and applied against some grants, um, the grant funding. My question is without getting into specifics of the type or what funding it was, et cetera, are those monies that this was applied against there for the current year? Or is this something that is temporary and we're gonna have to make this up?
Ken, let's go to the next page, and I can answer those. The one that says school, no, the school operating budget page. Yeah. No, you have one that says school operating budget? No. Keep going. No, I think you missed it. It should be back right next to the first, the unanticipated expenditures. It's right back. You have another one there? What comes after that, Ken? And then what's after that? And that, there it is, right there, just out of sequence. Can you make that a little bigger? Okay. So the first, so this is what happened. When we realized we hadn't made the savings that we thought, when June was coming to a close, we went in front of the Board of Education and said, the plan didn't work. And so what we'd like to do to balance our books, so to speak, yep, stay on this page for a second, is we did two things. First, we cut our spending plan as much as we could. And there were three areas primarily that we cut. And you see those in the third column of numbers there. You see that there's 1.6 million. Can you make it any bigger at all, Ken? Even if we lose the sides? Yeah. And go one step even more. Okay, let's try it. Okay. So you can see there, those are the line items we cut, and they came from three areas. The first was the cost centers, I'll call them, our principals, our program leaders, anyone, really anyone who had a budget. And we cut back those spending budgets by 30%. We exempted a few people for programs. We exempted technology. That, you know, such a growing field, we just didn't think we could cut there realistically. We exempted facilities. That budget has been under a lot of pressure, and just look at our buildings. We didn't want to do any less than we were doing. And we exempted the high school base allocation. Just because of the growing enrollment, it didn't make sense. But we did include in the 30% cuts the high school athletic department, for example. And then all of our other schools and programs. We cut, the cuts came to about $800,000, a little less than that as part of that $1.6 million that you see there. The second thing we recommended to cut, should back up. We'd also gone over and talked with the city finance director, Dan Garrett, with a rep from the mayor's office, and we said, we want you to know the plan didn't work. We're going to try and cut our budget, but we can't cut 4.7 million. We'll cut what we can, but we're going to come back and ask for something. And in that meeting, they suggested that we look at our utilities. And they said, you know, prices have come down since you set your budget in January and February. Take a look at those. And we'd also locked in some purchasing with the town purchasing department at prices that were lower than we had budgeted back in the winter. So the second set of cuts were to some of our utilities. I think it was heating oil, energy, maybe gasoline. I'm not sure. I could look those up, but that gave us a little more than 100,000 of cuts. And then the third leg is what Mr. Gianelli mentioned, and you see it on the chart there, the 919,000. If you read over to the left, it would say allocated staffing to grants. That's the one that got misunderstood. That's the one I believe the teachers union thought there were layoffs. It got to be, we didn't do a good job messaging that. But what we had going on is by July, we also had the governor's new 2-year budget. And in the 2-year budget, the Alliance grant, our $20 million Alliance grant was going up to 22 million. Part of a step up, it's going to continue to go up. So I think to Mr. Gianelli's question, was that a one-time source or do we have to make it up? We took 9 positions and took those out of the budget and put them in the Alliance grant. Because of the $2 million increase, we needed 1 million just to keep the contractual commitments in the grant going. Meaning, you've heard we have 40 some odd kindergarten teachers in there. They all get steps and adjustments, things like that. They have health insurance and the regular benefits any teacher would get here. So we needed one of the 2 million to get those increases, but we had another 1 million that we felt could receive additional staff. So the $919,000 you see here represents that decision to put people into the Alliance grant. Now, what I could have showed it as a reduction on the salary line, but I thought it was better to isolate it and show it right where it is as allocated staffing to grant, so we could talk about it like we are.
So,
Yep.
that's good in terms of, I'm satisfied that it's at least in a grant that is scheduled to increase in the next couple of years. So it's not a grant that's going to be depleted.
Correct.
We would have to then take this back into the current year.
Right.
So that's fine. So that accounts for the 1.6. Now, the mystery is the other $3 million. I say it's a mystery because I get confused in that we went before the council. You went before the council and just recently said that we're going to, I forget.
Condition it.
Condition it and allow us to draw down on that. And it was my understanding that you had mentioned we expect a favorable year. I'm not putting your words in your mouth, but as I construed it, to be almost a break even, and if not, we'll draw down on the 3 million. And then Kevin had said we were looking to best case scenario, we come up with a break even. Again, I'm paraphrasing, and we were next year we're going to ask instead of for the 3 for the full $5 million. Is that correct?
There's an important step that went into that. If you look first, before we leave this slide, you can see it going from 154, the second column. Then there's 1,000,006 in cuts. That brought it down to 153. Ken, if you look at, could you pull up the slide? I think it's right before it says budget balancing. There it is. And make it a little smaller. That's just a summary of the two strategies. You can see it adds the 4.7 million. It was a combination of those budget cuts I said of 1.684 and drawing down our reserves of 3,044,000. Now, to get to the point, that is still pending in front of the city council. At the ad hoc committee, I think we made good progress. They've asked us for some more information about how we're doing this year. But it seemed like the door was opened a little bit to continue to seek these resources. Now, the step, if I could, the step that about it turning to be a better year than we thought back in July was based on a strategy that we felt we had to take, we have to take. And that was to take even more positions that are in the budget and expenditures that we've made and put those into two grants that are expiring. One is the ESSER 3 grant itself. Our projections show that if nothing changes between now and June, there could be in the vicinity of $900,000 unspent. And we think it's partly from vacant positions, not just positions that we were looking for necessarily this year, but it goes back to the original plan that was laid down in the summer of, in August of 2021. Some of those things we put in there, remember it was a 3-year plan. We were going to do this, this, and this over 3 years. And as for $25 million, and now it looks like we're going to spend 24 million and change 3 years later. There was some capacity there. So what we have planned to do is take almost $1 million out of this 3 million and use the ESSER grant to pay for it. The other thing we've noticed is in our Title I grants, and particularly what we call the carryover grant. In your Title I grant, ours is close to $4 million. If you don't spend it by the end of the first year, you can spend it in the second year with their permission. And the carryover amount that we thought that we set up to spend this year, we have not. So what we'd like to do is the same thing, go into that grant, move some salaries out of the budget and use that. And we also see some money in the original Title I grant itself. The one that if we don't spend it this year, we'll be able to carry over a little. Next year, we want to spend it this year. We'd rather not carry it over if we can reduce what we're asking the city for. So with those strategies,
Excuse me.
yes.
Do you have numbers as to what that would be that you allocated to the carryover approximately,
I
or?
think it was a million four. Mike, do you remember what we did? It was going into two grants. Remember that? Okay. The total was about 2.4 or 5 million.
Including the
We're moving into
900,000.
grants. Yes. So the balance.
And my question, the ESSER money, I assume, is my understanding, is that 900,000 comes back in the $10 million ESSER.
That's correct.
Okay.
Exactly right.
The other two grants, the Title I, whatever you put in there, is that something that additional Title I money coming in the next year would be able to cover for what you put in there? Or is that somehow going to come back in the current year and the asking for an operating.
Well, I think there's a little bit of both. It's always nice to have a carryover grant. It's always nice to carry some over at the end of the year for unexpected things. You know, we're not gonna have that cushion that most districts have every year, including us. That'll be gone. We're using it for this. And from my sense is that the Title I program has changed a little bit, even in the last couple of years, from what we're doing with that. So I don't know on that part, but I can say that all of our needs for next year are either in the lights on budget or in the drivers. We're not expecting any overspending in the grants or things that are not typical. I hope I'm answering it.
No, it's not clear. Let me rephrase it.
Yeah.
Again, unlike the ESSA money,
Yeah.
what I'm concerned at is the balance of the 2.4 versus the 900,000. That money that went into the Title I, whether it be the carryover or the grant itself, in the current budget that you presented to us of the $178 million, are those costs incorporated in that number, or is that number going to be hypothetically 179 million because we don't feel that these grants are going to be sufficient to cover what you put in there?
Right.
I'm trying to make sure that 178 is the firm number, or is it 179?
The Title I grants have been around for a long time. And it's not unusual to see someone, based on what they're doing, they're paid out of the title grant every year based on what they do. They'll be here a long time. And when you get to almost February and there's monies that's not spent and the program's being carried out, it tells me that that's a safe place to go. Otherwise, I think we'd be doing, trying to fill it and things like that. So I'm comfortable that because of where we are in the year, that grant has the capacity.
Okay.
And given the situation we're in, it was a choice we wanted to make.
I think it's a
Yeah.
fair question.
Oh, yeah.
It's because the superintendent here, we're all talking about justifying 178, and if,
Yeah.
I don't want to bank on a gamble that we have another million we may or may not have. So if you're
Right.
comfortable,
I am.
it's going to be in here.
But, and also, we needed to do some things. We needed some strategies in case the city council money didn't come in. The ad hoc has looked at it twice. They haven't moved it out. We need to get ready for June.
No, I understand.
So that was part of it.
I understand
Yeah.
what you did, and,
Yeah.
and as I said, it was prudent. Because in the interim, I kept talking to Kevin. I said, I hope you're not going on spending at the rate that you anticipate getting the 3 mil. And he had said, no, he says, we're taking action to reduce that. So I can't argue with the strategy. This fills in at least my void of the missing 3, and of that, how much is coming back. I don't, and I'm going to pause here for a minute. I can't see. Teresa said she had a question. Is that right? No? Okay. Kate, I can't see, hands up if anybody has a question so far. So if they do, could you just tell them to speak up?
Sure.
Is there anybody who has a question so far? I mean, to me, this is clear, but my way of thinking somehow is a little bit disjointed. I go around the block to get, to the store, so to say. But I'm comfortable with the explanation that was given me, because I was troubled by the $3 million, thinking it was going to come back to bite us somehow, and not knowing where it fit into the 178. So,
Rich, Juanita has
my
her
own
hand up.
thinking. Juanita?
Thank you, Rich. I just have a question, John, on the school operating budget projections and reductions. If, can we go back to that on the screen? Right
That's the
there.
one. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yep.
And can you tell me, John, which line, I missed it, which line did you say was the 30% reduction to the schools? Was that under supplies?
Most of their cuts, we asked them what they would cut, and predominantly it was the supplies.
So that
They chose to-
549,
Well, the
111?
549 also has the utilities in there. Here in Danbury, energy is called a supply, so the 140,000 that if I remember right, that we took out of utilities is included in that 549.
Okay, I just want to be clear. That number doesn't sit right with me. I don't know why, but you're saying the 549, 111 includes the total 30% reduction on the pupil allocations.
The principals and program leaders also cut other line items. For example, you can see there dues and fees, staff development, there's 16,000 there. Purchase professional services, that was cut by some people as well. So there were, 4 or 5 different line items that were picked, but the lion's share was supplies.
Okay,
And
I don't have a clear understanding of what you're saying. So I'm just going to go back again to the people that are on the Zoom. I have before me the budget by locations, the base allocations for each of the schools. And there was a 30% reduction to each of those locations. And I am trying to find out where I need the total that was saved. I know it's broken down in line items, but each of them were given a reduction, 30% reduction from last year's allocation to the upcoming years. I'm sorry, this year's to the upcoming year's allocation. And I'm trying to figure out, John, where on this screen, I assume that you're saying that those reductions are split between the line items.
They are, yes.
Can you, if it's not too much, in our next board meeting, could you please give us a copy of the budget by location base allocations? The one that you've submitted to me? Can that be part of the package?
Of course. Did we get around to you yet the answers to the questions from the last board meeting? I think we might have sent that on Friday too, for Wednesday night. And we did put some information in a couple of the exhibits about that, but I'll go back and see if it identifies the cuts and see, maybe you could too, and then give me a call, see what else we can provide that's not
well,
in
if
those.
you, yeah, because I do have it in front of me, what you supplied for me. And so I would just like the other board members, including the finance committee, to actually see that document.
I had planned to walk through those exhibits on Wednesday night. But again, if you think there's something not in there that helps tell the story, just let me know and we can add to it. It's not.
Oh, and we can add it in?
Well, yeah, sure, we can present it to the board. Yeah, of course.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, John.
Okay, sure.
Sure.
So Rich, you're essentially asking the additional $3 million if it was rolled over into the proposed 178 million, is that correct?
That's correct. And the answer the answer to that is no, because it was absorbed I'm sorry, of the $3 million, approximately 900,000 would be rolled over into our current budget because it was applied against the ESSA 3 grants, which are completely wiped out. So that the 900,000 is part of the $10 million ESSA money that we're looking to provide in our current budget. The other monies, the other $2 million, are in existing grants that like the Alliance grant, would have funding in it to take care of those costs.
So then what is the $3 million ask that we're asking for the city? From the
There's-
reserve?
That was the confusing part. At this point, as I said, it was my understanding, and that ad hoc meeting got very confusing because Kevin and John went in very clearly saying, we're not asking for the 3. We'd like to have an authorization, or you used the word condition, a condition. We'd like to have a condition, so that we can draw down on it. And again, I'm paraphrasing, because we don't feel we're going to be $3 million in the hole, but best case scenario, we think we're going to break even, and if not, then whatever is over, we'd like to draw down rather than come back to you for this differential. They felt, so Kevin was saying, we felt comfortable that we are going to have a good year, that next year, and he was forewarning them, we're not going to ask you for the 3 million reserve, we're going to ask you for the full $5 million reserve. And then it got very confusing, and it went nowhere. So, but ultimately, they stated their case correctly, and then through an hour and a half of other conversations, it somehow got lost in translation. So I don't know where it is now, except giving him a lot of work, for nothing.
One more question. On the salaries, are that salary figure is for people we actually have and the benefits? This is not pending more hires at this point in the,
The 83 million.
right.
Okay. Last November, as we build the preliminary budget, what we do is we take a snapshot of everybody who's working, and a snapshot of the vacant positions maybe that haven't been filled yet. And for the people that are working, we look at what bargaining unit they're in and what step they're on. And we look at the collective bargaining agreement, if we have it for the next year, move them up a step, see what their salary is, and that's what we put into the budget. If there's a vacant position, and there were plenty last November, we make sure those are in. We decide on what we think we can hire them at, and that also goes in.
Under that same number.
Yes, however, so what you're seeing there in the 83 million was everyone was called on the payroll in the school budget. But we did the same thing last year, we're doing this year. There were people in ESSER 2 last year. And you remember that, like Dan Donovan was here, and the high school teachers. We calculated what that would be, salaries and benefits, but we isolated it down here on this enrollment impact line. So there's $4.5 million of what were new positions for us last year. So to answer your question, is it 83 million? It's 83 million plus the people that came in from ESSER 2. About $4.5 million.
So to bring us more up to date, a couple of weeks, now the mystery of the 150, 154 solved, we could move on to our current budget that we're going to talk about on Wednesday. A couple of weeks ago, I met with John and asked him if he could present the ESSER, the $10 million, in a format that combine, not combines, but mirrors basically what we're talking about in our budgets by classification. And that's how he developed this schedule. This is a long schedule, which he breaks it out in total, and then he breaks it out in terms not only by classification of account codes, but he also breaks it out into
Oh, that's this one here, the 5-year history, you mean?
no, it's a long spreadsheet.
Oh, the long spreadsheet. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So he breaks it out not only by category, but by, you got it?
Yes.
He breaks it out by the classifications as well. This is saying the same thing as we have without my budget book. In the budget presentations, we had slides that went through some of this, but the slides are good, but for our purposes, I like the accounting in more details. And so he already had the schedule, and perhaps he can go through this with us, because this now is going to be the comparison next week when we start talking about, or Wednesday, I'm not sure when, Wednesday.
Yes.
When we start talking about the differential between our budget, and our budget is 178 million versus 150 million. The only way I looked at it was because it was such a big number, and this year made up several components, unlike other years, where I kept referring to the lights on budget that we hadn't talked about yet of the 160 million, and then building on top of that the $10 million of ESSER money, and then the other $8 million of basically new asks. So, there are different ways of looking at it. However, I think this completes it and puts it in a line number or category so that it's simpler, at least for me to understand. And it completes the picture.
Could I walk through now?
Go ahead.
Okay. Ken, you have two charts, those ones we were talking about with the yellow columns. It didn't show up in what people have, but I'd like to go to the second one. And for the rest of us, it's the one I sent around singly, maybe a half an hour before the meeting started. It's also called 24-25 Superintendent's Budget. Ken has it there now. The difference between the two charts is one column that appears under the word superintendent. There's a new column that I've added, and it's called Current Programs and Services. And I'll explain that in a minute, but that's the right one. Ken's pointing to it. So what you have here, the numbers in the first two columns should be familiar. That's what we just talked about. That's the budget as adopted, and then the budget without the savings, the 150 and the 154. And then when we built our lights on budget, it came up to 160 million. That's, you see under the column that says carried forward. And it's just those 7 or 8 line items being projected forward using some of the technique I described on salaries and some things like that. But one of the things you see in there, if in that third column, if you go down to that line item I was talking about before, enrollment impact equipment, and I told you last year it had over $5 million. Look at what's there in the lights on budget. It's not there anymore because those salaries are now up in the salary line where they belong, those high school teachers. You might say, well, John, what's in the 1.2 million? Why is it still so high? The big thing in there is the repairs from Rich Jalbert's facilities budget. Remember, we started adding, I think it's about $800,000 for repairs that are not part of the city's purview that we want to do. This will be the second or third year we've done that. You'll see those on Wednesday night. But what I just want to show you to start with is you see that number dropping way down. So as you go across, you see in that, when we did that, we needed 160 million. That's 10 million more than 150, of course. And that's a 6.99% increase. Let's call it 7. But of that 7, 3.15 of the 7, 3.15% is making up that 4.7 million. I'll say it again, because see, that's not there anymore, blank. So the 6.99, 3 of that, 3 of the 7 is making up the money that we had the year before. But the rest of the lights on budget here is up just under 4%. And that's what we're going to talk about Wednesday. I'm going to show you what we've done for in energy, for example. That's one of the reasons it's down. What we think about health insurance, transportation, and so on and so forth. Now, together, there's $10 million. And we met this morning, and I think, well, let me just walk you across quickly. When you go from the 160, the next, what you see going left to right are the different drivers that we really have emphasized in our 2 workshops so far. You'll recognize these number. There's the ESSER 3 that's expiring, almost 10.8 million. The high school, we're calling it the overcrowding. That's the 9 core teachers, the 5 elective teachers, some more buses and classroom furniture, opening up the academies. And as you go across the list, you're seeing the money that we've proposed. And at the bottom, what kind of percent that is, say, adding to the 7%, just for discussion. Instructional improvement, that's the last thing we put in. You heard Mr. Walston talk about the paras that would go in the classrooms, the kindergartens, all that. That's that one. Security and technology is there. The special ed 5 teachers we need, and the support for the multi-language learners. You add that across, here you can see $18 million of increases, bringing us up from 160 to 178. You can see, compared to the 150, there's the $28 million. And the messaging we've had so far, the main point we've been trying to have people understand is that the ESSER 3 is expiring. Call the fiscal cliff, whatever. That is a big mover. But as we talked this morning, we realized that we really can't let people think that if we got 160 million, it would be the same program and services next year that we have this year. It's not. I think, Kate, you might have been the one that first brought this up. You know, the ESSER 3 people are here. That's part of the programs and services. You know, to have the same thing next year that we have this year without any improvements, without thinking that high school enrollment's going up, we really need 170 million. We have to have those ESSER staff members. So on the chart, you see that column we put in, current programs and services. I'm adding into the original 10 million, the 10 million for ESSER. So I think we could maybe call, if we were going to call that the lights on budget, but I think the second message we want to start carrying is that, you know, to keep things the same, we need both. So that's kind of that's a new way of looking at it. Maybe, Rich, I'll stop there and.
Yeah, you threw me a curve
Yeah.
before. Go back.
Okay.
You mentioned the 6.99%.
Yes,
Then you went on to say percentage, approximately half or something, included the 4.7.
well, yeah,
I mean,
I
it's
gotta
like
find the
double-
right choice of
double
words, I
dipping
know,
to me,
after I said
because,
that, yeah,
I mean, it should only be, I mean,
right,
it should only be $1 million, the stuff that you didn't transfer
Yeah.
out,
right.
the stuff that you didn't transfer out to grants.
The lights on budget there, the third column, that's 160 million. It's going up 10 million.
Right. And you can justify the reasons for it, but, I want to make
Yeah.
sure that, the statement that this includes the $4.7 million that we were short when we just accounted for 2.4 million going to the ESSER and the Title I grants, and plus
Right.
another 900,000 going to Alliance, that, you can't have it back in here. So I say
Right.
it's like double dipping.
Right, right.
So, we want to make sure that this is not overstated, or is your statement just incorrect, that it includes
Right.
the 4.7. I could understanding if you're putting back in your presentation here, the numbers on, when you have the school budget, where you show the $1.6 million, everything on there came out of the budget, with the exception of the 919 that was transferred to Alliance. But the others, if you're saying we're gonna make that up and put it into this year, I can understand that. But
I think the way you see that, you might say, why is that operating budget up so low? How could it be under 4%? And one of the reasons is some salaries have gone into Alliance. Some salaries have gone into the Title I, so they're there for good. This is what's left. Remember, our labor contracts, really because of inflation and some of the needs we've had to find people, they're not twos and threes anymore. They're threes and fours. So if anything, the budget should be a little higher than that, but we've done these strategies to help. They last. Maybe that's the way to say it. No question.
just so long as the 4.7 million does not include the duplicated in here.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I just understood that. And so Teresa,
These salaries, this is as was presented previously.
Yeah.
There's no new, I saw something about site administrators now for the new,
Right.
the new building. I didn't call site administrators two,
Okay.
let alone one.
So those positions are, if you look in the column that says academies, kind of in the middle, there's 200,000. That number has been the same since the beginning. But what we've done is, we didn't think those were labeled correctly when we first put it out. We actually think a better title might be program administrators. And we've had a number of discussions. What will the work be? Who will they report to? So this is really money for leadership in both buildings, planning before July. We don't have exact titles on those yet.
If I may,
Um,
some of that
yeah.
also is subject to negotiation with the unions. And so I think the site administrator title evolved out of your original inquiry around, too many principals and it's confusing. And so in reflection of that, we did have some conversations about the titling of that, but it also is subject to bargaining, negotiation, and then, of course, the organization itself of the high school to the new campus. You're welcome.
The salaries that have changed since we first presented are in that one driver, that one improvement, that we're calling instructional improvement. That's the 2.6. That's mostly paraeducators in the classrooms with teachers, all grade levels.
so the in essence, I just want to say that presentation you gave here on the spreadsheet, I like it. It makes sense. Come Wednesday, we're gonna have to now dig through and defend,
I'd like to
The-
use it if we could.
yeah, defend the difference between what makes up salaries, and the components and how it was derived at. But at least we have the understanding as to where we are. We confirmed the 150. This has a nice breakdown to it, and we can take it from here. The other thing is the other schedules that are attached. Is a lot of information. I think you could read at your leisure, unless you have questions on it. The one I think John may want to point out had to do with a projection he did, because I keep complaining about a multi-year projection, and he says, hey, you know, somehow we listen to you, but, and if we had done it, yeah, I had it here for a minute. So if you want to explain that, John.
Ken, the one that says fiscal year 21, 22, could you just go to this, the next page after that? This one is, I'm amazed at this every time I look at it. I remember looking at this when I first got here, and boy, it means a lot more now, I'll tell you. So in June of 2021, the, my predecessor, along with under Mr. Janelli's leadership, put this multi-year budget together. And it's really good. And I won't go through everything, but the page that you're looking at there, what it did was it said, if the city doesn't start increasing its contribution, our costs are going up, and we're going to be losing ESSER, so this big gap is going to happen. They called it a cumulative variance, was the name they gave it. You can see it right there, it's small. But as you look at it and you go over to fiscal year 25, the fourth column, remember, they were projecting 3 years ahead of time. They showed a cumulative variance after you've lost the ESSER of the city not really ponying up too much, of $24 million. Boy, that is awfully close to do 3 years ahead of time. And then it goes on to say, here's how much more the city should be putting in so that we don't have these things happening. So that was, I'll just read, it says, even with the ESSER funds to offset some of the costs through 2025, the Board of Ed and City of Danbury will be left with a great gap or cliff in fiscal year 26 if we do not keep pace with it, so on and so forth. That is amazing. So, when we came up with that cliff slide last year, we call it, we've seen a couple meetings, we said, oh, hey, we told you last year, here's how we told you. We put this out several years ago and told the same thing. So I just wanted to share it with you. I'm sure many of you saw it when it came out, but it was a good piece of work.
And two, I'd like to take time to make an editorial comment. We should never do again what we did, what was done historically in terms of using funds to this magnitude that we don't have assurances for. I look at it as taking out a debit card and having no way of paying it back, or gambling and not having it to debt. But not to say that the district needed that money in order to function. The difference in terms of, having hindsight and not being there. It just puts you in a bind. My point being, we are faced with the same challenge right now with regard to the academy. There was a budget that was presented in the presentation to us, or I think it was there, of some $13 million. Okay? Maybe $2 million, or maybe $1 million was expended. Another million or million and a half, I think, is in the proposed ask of the new ask of the 8 million. But it's leaving somewhere about $12 million. We have a structure that is being built that is anticipated to be open in what, 24, 25?
25, 26.
25, 26. The entire city of Danbury is, has their ribbon and they're waiting for ribbon cutting to do that. That money was already provided for by a bonding, that the city paid. What they neglected to do was to give us the money to fund that district, to open it up with the staff it needs. And we cannot continue in next year to go through, hire people, incur debt without the guarantee, and I use that word guarantee, that that money is going to be here for us. Otherwise, it's going to be chaos, and then the superintendent is going to have a difficult time trying to maneuver and fill that building. So it's just, we've learned a lesson in the past. We have to, I guess what I'm saying is, we now have to start working differently than we've worked in the past. We have to work closer with the city. They have to be part of our operation. We have to understand what they are. It's important. The days that we were asking for $2, $3, $4 million, it's totally gone. We're talking telephone numbers now in double digits, and we need we need a collaborative effort, on the city's part to understand this and make sure, in order for us to make plans as to what we're going to do. So the method of operating has to be changed, and it's just, we don't want to repeat the same mistake. But with that being said, I'm satisfied with what was being presented, to what was my thoughts on what we'd accomplished tonight on this particular agenda. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Okay, seeing that, I would like, one of the items, I think the last item on the agenda, I don't have my glasses, but I had asked the committee members to, it's not that John doesn't have enough work, is to come up with 3 reports that they would like to see furnished. I don't care. And then you could put on there whether it be a quarterly, monthly, or just leave it blank and we can discuss it. Different types of reporting that you would like to see. If you would email me that, I'll then consolidate it, and in one of our committee meetings, we could talk about it and prioritize it, and then maybe put calendar dates on it. And the purpose of that is, I think there are reports that should be eligible for us to see that we don't get, or if we get them 1 year, you may not get them the other year. So we can decide that this is a regular routine type of reporting, as well as what the district wants to present to us. So if you just send me those emails, I'll consolidate it, and then we'll talk about it at the next meeting. Teresa?
I asked, how's the status of the audit?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no,
We're still
so,
being asked.
no, there are 2 things. Try and explain them quickly. When the city publishes its annual report called the CAFR, they take the financial results and they show them 2 different ways. One's called a budget basis, and one's called GAAP, Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. And the difference is, when you do on the budget basis, anything that you've budgeted is shown as an expense. On the GAAP basis, and this is just something the accountants do for the report, if bills are not paid, even if they're budgeted, they come out. It's to make the statement look more familiar and friendly to investors in our bonds, so that they can see things the way they're looking at corporate annual reports, which are on a GAAP basis. And really what they're looking at is if you have enough cash flow to pay down your interest on your bonds. So they don't want to know if it's budgeted, they want to know what's there. So about a week ago, Mike, we heard from the audit manager that they wanted us to restate our grant fund on a gap basis, which never done before. We always just sent things over, but we did it. I think it took a day or two. And then today there was an email that said, we want you to go into your general fund and restate it for this gap basis. So we said we'd do it, and we did. And then they said, well, we want you to do a journal entry now. And we're actually having the city do it. It's new stuff that we never had to do before. But because they asked for it, we're doing it. I wish they could have asked for that a month or two ago, but is there anything else? That's the whole list, right?
No, we've submitted,
Yeah.
everything that they've asked for originally,
Yeah.
and they're doing their subsequent testing, so right now it's down to very granular things they want us to pull. They want to see copies of people's, pay stubs, they want to see the payroll register, they want to see the union contracts, things of that nature, so
Is that for 6/22 or
Yeah.
23?
that's, you're at 22.
Right.
Some in the summer of 21.
Well, that's sort of a late time to request that. That's usually done way in the
Rich,
beginning.
this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Can I ask, is this still by Zoom? Everything by
It's,
Zoom?
it's elect,
So
yes,
that's
it's
right, yeah, they have a
electronic.
portal, and we drag things into the portal, or,
But those
Yeah.
requests are done early in the initial part. It's like
They
grunt
have
work, you know, it's like you have a
Is that
junior
a-
accountant checking off bank
Yeah.
reconciliations to make sure it's done.
three times we've had everything at zero.
And then they come back for
There's some
more.
new stuff.
This is awful,
Crazy.
Rich.
I think there's a lot of, items, open items left for the city, so while the city's preparing those items.
I figure you got nothing to do.
Yeah, they'll do that, which is, I don't mind, because while, I'm acquainting myself with the software now and pulling this up for 22, I'm pulling the same data for 23, so that in a few months, when they come and ask for 23, we're much well.
I would imagine, if you could keep track of all the requirements and doing that. And then this is what you did this year, then you have to do it this year. You know, 22, we're following what you did for 23, so. I can't believe these people, they're nuts.
Kate, if it's okay, then could I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Could I get a second
So moved.
by Teresa? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you. I thank you all for your participation. I hope you found it informative and satisfactory.